my past life, the top student in our grade, my childhood friend Lucas, and a transfer student Sophia fell passionately in love. For her, Lucas started skipping classes, smoking, drinking, and getting into fights. His grades plummeted drastically. In the end, his mother, Mrs. Taylor, stepped in and sent the transfer student Sophia back on the right path. Lucas went on to a bright future and eventually married me. I thought my years of unrequited love had finally paid off. But to my shock, just before I was about to give birth, Lucas beat me so severely that my water broke, leading to massive blood loss and my death. His crazed expression haunted me as he screamed, "Do you even realize, Emma? It was because of you that Sophia's awful husband killed her. Your perfect life was built on her suffering. She's dead, so you don't deserve to live either." When I opened my eyes again, I found myself back in my senior year of high school. Lucas stood leaning against a wall, warning me with a smug grin, just as I remembered. That day, I had smiled at them and offered my blessing. Youth is meant to be reckless. Only a fiery, passionate romance can make it truly worthwhile. I hope you two stay miserable together forever. At the time, Lucas and Sophia were inseparable, envied by everyone. "Aren't they the perfect couple?" someone said from nearby. "Isn't that Lucas Taylor and his girlfriend? Wow, I'm so jealous." "And who's that over there?" another asked. "You don't know? That's Emma Green, who's been chasing Lucas for years but hasn't won him over. So shameless." Their mocking voices carried clearly, as if they wanted to make sure I heard every word. In my previous life, when Lucas asked to meet me, I had foolishly thought he was finally going to confess his feelings. I had even prepared a small gift for him. Instead, he showed up with Sophia to warn me off. "Emma, if you dare bully Sophia again, don't blame me for forgetting we were childhood friends," he had said coldly. Sophia, nestled in his arms, wiped away non-existent tears, looking heartbreakingly pitiful. I couldn't deny her beauty. She was alluring, no doubt about it, which explained why Lucas was so captivated by her. Back then, I had longed to be the one in his arms. Now, looking at the two of them, I could barely hold back my disdain. Rolling my eyes, I recalled the root of their hatred for me. Oh, right. It was because I'd uploaded photos of Sophia drinking and partying onto the school forum. With a cheeky grin, I said, "Fine, Lucas, I'll back off now. Youth is meant to be reckless. Only a fiery, passionate romance can make it worthwhile. I hope you two stay miserable together forever." With that, I turned on my heel and walked away, not bothering to engage with them any further. Even as I left, Sophia froze, cautiously watching me, afraid I might pull some trick to steal her precious boyfriend. How ridiculous. In my previous life, Lucas had killed me during my pregnancy, causing my water to break and leading to my death from blood loss. Such a scumbag. If I could relive my life, I wouldn't just refuse to forgive him. I'd stomp on him if I had the chance. Life is precious, and this second chance is something I intend to cherish. I packed my things, took a leave of absence, and decided to embrace the joys of youth fully. How could you dare upload Sophia's photos to the forum? Aren't you afraid her husband will get mad? My best friend, Summer, teased. "Summer, say that again. He's my husband." I grabbed her ear, correcting her as I refused to acknowledge such a disgusting title. "This isn't the classy Emma Green the first no. You don't remember how pathetic you used to look? Even I wanted to punch you back then." Summer sighed dramatically. I couldn't help but feel ashamed for my past self. Me, the sole heiress of the Green family, lowering my status for Lucas Taylor, trailing behind him like a lovesick puppy, even disappointing my parents. Never again. I'll make full use of everything I have now, for myself and for my parents. It's not like I wanted to take those photos of Sophia at the party. She threatened me first. There's no way I'd let that go. I hadn't finished speaking when Summer nudged me playfully. "Look, isn't that your husband and his precious girlfriend over there?" She pointed toward the corner of the cafeteria. Sure enough, there was Lucas cheering on Sophia. She stood out even in the hazy, smoke-filled surroundings, dressed in a way that highlighted her purity, looking different from the other girls around her. She only had eyes for Lucas, and he couldn't resist her charm. Skipping class, drinking, smoking, fighting. He did it all for her. Poor Mrs. Taylor. If she knew, she'd be heartbroken again. Check it out. The forum is blowing up. Summer waved her phone in front of me, looking as gleeful as she did in my past life. What's your plan now? She asked. In my previous life, I had been dragged down by Sophia countless times. Her schemes had eventually led to my death at Lucas's hands. But this time, I was ready. My plan? To play along. Of course, I said, opening a rarely used contact on my phone. In my past life, I had suspected Lucas of cheating after our marriage and had hired a private investigator to dig into his affairs. This time, it seems my role is entirely different. Are you going to study abroad or not? I asked Summer. In my past life, I stayed in the same city as Lucas after high school, abandoning my dream of seeing the world just to be with him. After we got married, he outright forbade me from pursuing it. That dream remained shelved until my death. Are you going or not? I pressed her again. If you're going, I'll go too. Summer replied absent-mindedly, her eyes fixed on the cake in front of her, clearly uninterested in my questions. We quickly agreed 2 months from now, we'd set off, traveling to a few places first before settling at a school abroad. By the time people were still swooning over Lucas and Sophia as the perfect couple, we'd already be lounging on a sunny island, sipping cocktails and living our best lives. But Sophia, for some reason, couldn't seem to let me go. At Lucas's birthday banquet, she appeared in a deep red gown adorned with sparkling crystals. The dress was as flashy as it was suggestive. I only attended because I didn't want to upset Mrs. Taylor. My plan was to remain invisible throughout the event. Sophia, however, had other ideas. The moment Mrs. Taylor stepped away, she came over to me, holding a glass of wine. Emma, just delete the photos. Lucas and I can forgive you if you do, she said sweetly. You can even come hang out with us in the future. How kind of her. Already imagining herself as the lady of the house. She leaned in closer, her eyes narrowing maliciously as she whispered in a voice only I could hear. You know Lucas always listens to me. Some people are just rotten to the core, no matter how well they pretend otherwise. I wasn't fazed. Looks like you've been watching me more than your husband. What? Sophia? Are you secretly in love with me? I replied with a smirk. By the way, I'm not going anywhere. Bring it on. Lucas had been nearby, quietly listening to everything without intervening. His expression flickered with something unfamiliar, maybe frustration. He looked at me darkly, his tone low. Emma, didn't you hear Sophia talking to you? If you don't delete those photos, don't blame me for what happens next, he warned, narrowing his eyes in a ridiculous display of hostility. I felt a chill run down my spine, not from fear, but from sheer disgust. Don't rush, Sophia. Your karma is coming. Lucas, you'll get yours too, I said casually, my voice dripping with mockery. In my previous life, I had been a lamb to the slaughter. Now, I was the one holding the scales of justice against these two. Sophia's smug expression vanished the moment someone else approached us, and she immediately softened her tone. Lucas, don't blame her, she said, putting on a show of understanding and grace. Sophia was cunning and manipulative, always making the most of every resource at her disposal to climb higher. If you didn't know her true nature, you'd be completely taken in by her act. I took those photos myself. Why should I delete them? Besides, this is far from over, I said, leaving my words deliberately vague. The atmosphere grew tense until Mrs. Taylor called Lucas over to greet some guests. Reluctantly, he led Sophia away, maintaining a distance from me as though afraid Mrs. Taylor might misunderstand our relationship. If he could have been 800 meters away from me, he would have done it, as if I wanted to see him anyway. Sophia, ever the actress, waited for a moment before patting Lucas on the shoulder with a gentle smile. All right, Lucas, don't get upset with your mom. Let's go together. Mrs. Taylor closed her eyes and took a deep breath, her usually elegant brows furrowing in frustration. The guests, oblivious to who Lucas was holding onto, began their usual fawning. Meanwhile, I took the opportunity to slip out of the suffocating venue unnoticed. Just as I stepped outside, my phone buzzed with a message. Miss Green, everything has been taken care of as instructed. It read. I had contacted a private investigator, AAA, to stir up trouble. The timing was perfect. As soon as the drama broke out at school, Sophia had been hiding, too afraid to face the consequences. By now, several burly men with tattoos snaking up their arms had cornered the school gates, shouting, "Sophia, come out here. You think you can scam me out of my money and just run off?" Their threatening presence drew a crowd, and Summer tugged at my arm, eager to watch the chaos unfold. As I observed the scene, a sense of familiarity crept over me. These were the same thugs from my previous life, Sophia's abusive husband's cronies. I sent a double payment to the investigator as a reward for finding Sophia's enemies to stir things up. I hadn't expected them to show up so spectacularly. Justice may be delayed, but it will always come, I thought with satisfaction as the men continued shouting, their curses echoing through the gates. The commotion quickly drew the attention of the school's security. Unable to remain hidden any longer, Sophia had no choice but to seek Lucas's help. "Lucas, please help me. I didn't mean for things to turn out this way," she pleaded, clinging to his arm. As she spoke, she glanced in my direction, her eyes filled with hatred. Sophia was determined to pin the blame on me, her convenient scapegoat. This time, though, she wasn't wrong. I was the one who orchestrated it. I cast her a look of approval. "Didn't you say you'd never interact with them again, Emma?" Summer teased, grinning mischievously. Before Lucas could say anything, the thugs surrounding Sophia's trembling figure started yelling loudly, moving toward our direction. I wasn't interested in watching Lucas play the dashing hero, swooping in to save his damsel in distress. Turning on my heel, I walked away. Summer quickly caught up, practically bouncing with curiosity, her excitement almost cartoonishly evident. "You're not staying to see Sophia's true colors exposed? Shouldn't you be thrilled?" she asked, smirking. "Am I that petty?" I scoffed. "Sophia is the star of her own drama, playing the heroine in this little rescue act with Lucas. Let's not ruin their fun." We walked away, heading against the flow of the crowd gathering to watch the chaos. From a distance, I could hear the men shouting accusations, demanding Sophia come out and face them. "Lucas has his fancy title, his pretty face, and his brain for academics," I said. "But let's be honest, he's got nothing else. His methods for bailing out his precious Sophia are so tired and predictable." "True," Summer chimed in. "But if Sophia and Lucas keep pulling stunts like this, it won't be long before Mrs. Taylor steps in. When that happens, it's game over for them. And even if nothing serious happens, ruining their reputation will be a breeze." We hadn't walked far before the sound of sirens filled the air, followed by an ambulance rushing past us. I glanced back briefly. It seemed the confrontation had escalated, and someone had gotten hurt. Most likely, Mrs. Taylor would once again swoop in to clean up Lucas's mess. Pulling back the rose-tinted glasses of my past life, I finally saw Lucas for what he truly was. The disgust I felt for him was overwhelming. Not long after, Lucas showed up at my house. He reeked of alcohol, and before I could even ask who was at the door, he pushed his way in, slamming me against the wall. The stench of liquor hit me like a wave. In my past life, this might have made my heart flutter, and I probably would have leaned into him like a love-struck fool. But now, I wasn't that same girl anymore. "What do you think you're doing?" I snapped, pushing him off. He slumped against me, his breath hot on my neck, making me uncomfortable. His words slurred together, and I couldn't tell if he was truly drunk or just pretending. "Emma, you don't understand," he mumbled. "She's not like that. Sophia is kind and sweet." Before he could finish his sentence, he gagged and leaned closer, ready to vomit. "Ugh, if you're going to throw up, do it somewhere else." I shoved him aside, covering my mouth in disgust. Instead of moving away, he grabbed my hand and held it tightly. "When I was little, my parents fought all the time. They almost divorced. I ran away from home that night," he started, his voice raw. I froze, surprised by the sudden shift in his tone. "Sophia, she stayed with me all night in the cold. Her didn't leave me alone," he continued, his grip on my hand tightening. "So that's what this was about." I remembered the incident. He'd been stubborn even back then, refusing to go home despite the freezing weather. He even made me promise not to tell anyone. Afraid of upsetting him, I'd foolishly stayed with him under the slide, braving the bitter cold until morning. By the time I couldn't take it anymore and ran to his house for help, Lucas had nearly frozen. If I hadn't caved when I did, he might not have survived to be the arrogant man he was now. As he slumped in my arms, his usual overconfidence and idiocy seemed to fade. For a moment, he was quiet, almost vulnerable. "So, I'm your guiding light." "Huh," I muttered under my breath, half joking. "And here I thought I was the villain in your little love story with Sophia." It didn't matter anymore, though. "Sophia's a great person," he said, his voice soft. "I like her, and I owe her. But why did you leave?" "Wait, what?" I blinked, confused. My irritation returned immediately. Shoving him onto the couch, I wiped away the thin sheen of sweat forming on my forehead. "Who told you anything?" "My mom," he mumbled, trying to inch closer again. "Ah, that explained it. Mrs. Taylor had always been kind to me, regardless of how terrible Lucas could be. If it weren't for the awkward situation of her son being the wedge between us, I could have seen us becoming friends." "Lucas, this has nothing to do with you. Leave," I ordered, pushing him toward the door. Taking advantage of his momentary drunken confusion, I shoved him out and locked the door. His pounding on the door quickly became muffled as I put in my earbuds, pretending not to hear him. If he passed out on the sidewalk, that was none of my concern. Just then, Summer called me on video chat. "Emma, check this out," she said excitedly as the call connected. She sent me a screenshot, and when I opened it, my confusion quickly turned to anger. It was a post from Sophia's social media account, showing her at the headquarters of Green Enterprises, my family's company. The caption read, "Spending my holiday learning at Dad and Mom's company. Tag, work hard, play hard." The comments were flooded with praise, calling her a perfect young lady and marveling at her family background. What the hell? First, she steals my place as Lucas's angel, and now she's claiming my parents as her own. I fumed. You can't blame me for being ruthless when you were heartless first. I turned back to my computer and composed an email. The invitation was addressed to Miss Sophia Green, heiress of the Green family, formally inviting her to attend the Taylor family banquet as a special guest and announcing her relationship with Lucas. Her public humiliation would begin there. Everything I suffered in my previous life, I would make sure she experienced it all. The Taylor estate was brightly lit for the banquet. Uniformed staff moved seamlessly through the rooms, serving plates of exquisite pastries and glasses of champagne. Though it was still early, a few scattered guests had already arrived, chatting softly in the living room as the crisp clink of champagne glasses filled the air. I put on a rarely worn evening gown, arriving at the Taylors' home well in advance. My primary goal was to speak with Mrs. Taylor one last time and bid her goodbye. "Emma, don't worry," Mrs. Taylor assured me warmly. "Today, I made sure there wouldn't be any outsiders." She placed special emphasis on the word outsiders, clearly hinting at someone. I nodded obediently, offering her a sweet smile. "It's fine, Auntie. I just came to say goodbye." Mrs. Taylor squeezed my hand gently. "You have my support. Let me know if you need anything. Oh, and there's a property in Italy. It's yours if you want it. Once the banquet is over, we'll grab the keys together." She genuinely treated me like a daughter, and for that, I was grateful. More guests began to arrive, gathering around Mrs. Taylor to raise their glasses. The atmosphere became lively, with laughter and conversation filling the space. I wasn't used to attending events like this and only mingled briefly before slipping away when Mrs. Taylor excused herself to change into a new outfit. In the quieter space of the garden, I overheard a heated argument. "Do you even know who I am? How dare you stop me?" A sharp, arrogant voice rang out. It was unmistakably Sophia's. "I'm sorry, miss." A bodyguard responded stoically. Mrs. Taylor gave strict orders. No unauthorized individuals are allowed in. Sophia, being Sophia, whipped out her phone to call Lucas. After a quick glance at the caller ID, the guard reluctantly let her through. Sophia strutted into the banquet hall, her entrance attracting curious stares. Her overly sweet smile masked the fiery temper she had shown just moments ago. "Hello, everyone," she greeted warmly, attempting to blend in. To her credit, she didn't announce her identity outright, instead waiting expectantly for someone to formally introduce her. But the room remained silent. After an awkward few seconds, the other guests resumed their conversations, leaving her standing awkwardly alone. Sophia didn't seem to notice, or more likely, pretended not to. She tried inserting herself into various groups, her audacious demeanor somehow making her seem adaptable. I had to admit, shamelessness could indeed be a skill. "Emma, I didn't expect to see you here," she called out suddenly, as though I was the one out of place. Feigning innocence, she added, "Didn't the school's punishment teach you a lesson?" The incident she referred to had caused quite a stir. The last time Sophia had stirred up trouble, it led to a school investigation. She'd been expelled, while Lucas was suspended for weeks. He hadn't stepped foot back on campus since. Mentioning it now, a flicker of resentment crossed her face before she quickly changed the subject. "Emma, your dress looks a lot like mine," she said with feigned surprise, loud enough for others to overhear. "No, wait. It's slightly different." Her words immediately drew attention. It was rare to see matching outfits at such events, and her remark hinted at an intentional clash. She covered her mouth lightly with her hand, as if embarrassed. "I'm so sorry, Emma. I didn't notice before. Everyone's circumstances are different, I suppose," she said, her tone dripping with false pity. I smiled coolly. "Circumstances may vary, but I don't wear knockoffs. And this dress isn't exactly cheap." Sophia's face stiffened, but she quickly regained her composure. "It's not about the price, Emma," she said, her voice sickeningly sweet. "What matters is what's inside." "Exactly," I replied, refusing to back down. "And what's inside should match the outfit. If you want to compare appearances, I'll raise you. Let's compare substance instead." Grabbing her hand gently, I added with mock concern, "Sophia, your outfit suits you perfectly. That's all that matters. Whether it's real or fake doesn't change that." Her expression darkened visibly, though she tried to keep her composure in front of the other guests. "Emma, what are you talking about? My parents would never buy me anything fake," she said defensively, her voice a touch louder than necessary. That moment, someone in the crowd chimed in. "By the way, may I ask what your father does for a living?" The question hung in the air, and Sophia's face paled slightly. "My father is the CEO of Green Enterprises," Sophia declared confidently, her voice ringing out loud enough for everyone to hear. As expected, she took the bait. The room fell silent, and everyone exchanged curious glances, unsure whether to believe her bold claim. Even though I'd already anticipated her shamelessness, I was still taken aback by how effortlessly she stole my identity. Did she think I didn't have parents and had to borrow hers? "Sophia, stop embarrassing yourself," I said coldly, my eyes narrowing. "We both know I'm the real daughter of the Green family. Pretending won't make it true." Sophia, unfazed, placed a hand delicately on her chest as if offended by my silent accusation. "Emma, how could you say such a thing? If you don't believe me, I can call the company right now." Under the watchful eyes of the guests, she pulled out her phone and dialed a number. After a brief pause, the line connected, and a polite, professional voice answered. "Good afternoon, Green Enterprises. How may I help you?" Sophia didn't hesitate. "This is Sophia Green. Where is my father?" The room went deathly quiet as everyone strained to catch every word. "Mr. Green is currently in a meeting," the voice replied. "Would you like me to leave him a message?" Sophia hung up with a self-satisfied smile, looking around at the crowd. "You see, I really am the Green family heiress. And as for my engagement to Lucas Taylor, why would I make such things up?" She batted her eyelashes innocently, radiating the perfect image of a pitiable and virtuous young woman. Even after being reborn, I found myself astonished by her boundless audacity. Sophia seemed addicted to stealing. First my identity, then my parents. Sophia's words caused a subtle shift in the atmosphere. A woman dressed in a garish gold outfit stepped forward, clearly on Sophia's side. "Young lady, you don't need to pretend to be someone else," she said, her tone both condescending and supportive of Sophia. I couldn't help but raise an eyebrow at the absurdity of it all. Pretend? Me? You've really got your head in the clouds, don't you? I shot back. Another guest joined in, chastising Sophia. There's no need to make things so awkward. The real Green family heiress is right here. You should step aside. Exactly. You seem like a decent enough person. But I can't believe you do something so shameless. Someone else chimed in. The tide was turning against Sophia. But she didn't give up. Her smug expression returned, confident she could talk her way out of this. But this time, I wasn't going to let her win. Sophia's victory was short-lived as Lucas finally arrived, fashionably late. Why is everyone gathered here? He asked, his gaze shifting uneasily when he spotted Sophia. For a moment, his expression wavered, but he quickly moved to her side, instinctively shielding her. Sophia, what are you doing here? He asked, glancing around nervously, clearly looking for his mother. The fear of Mrs. Taylor catching them together was evident. A bystander stepped forward and explained. This young lady claimed to be the Green family heiress and Lucas Taylor's fiancée. She's been rather disrespectful and even dared to attend the Taylor banquet uninvited. Lucas's gaze darted between me and Sophia, disbelief written all over his face. Despite being childhood friends, he seemed to have completely forgotten that I was the real heiress. Sophia had clearly gambled on the fact that few people had met me in person and assumed no one could expose her lie. But Lucas, at least, should have known better. After all, we'd grown up together. This time, her lie would backfire spectacularly. Lucas, ever the fool, tried to smooth things over. This is all just a misunderstanding. I think Sophia might be a little confused, he said, turning to me with a pleading look. Can't we just let this go? I rolled my eyes so hard it hurt. Really? Lucas, you're still covering for her? Maybe we should stop calling you Mr. Bold and start calling you Mr. Gullible. Before Lucas could respond, a melodious voice cut through the tension. Miss Green, your dress is absolutely stunning. Is it one of Dia's classic designs? I couldn't get my hands on it when it was released. A woman in a dark green gown adorned with sparkling diamonds approached gracefully. Her elegance was undeniable, though there was a playful boldness in her demeanor. I recognized her instantly. It was Vivian, Lucas's aunt. I'd met her a few times when I was younger, and she'd always been lively and full of charm, sneaking us out for burgers when no one was looking. You're still as beautiful as ever, Aunt Vivian, I said with a smile, falling naturally into conversation with her. She smiled warmly, placing a hand on my arm. And you've grown into such a lovely young woman. Emma, it's been too long. Just 2 sentences from her were enough to ease the tension. The tide was clearly turning back in my favor, and I couldn't wait to see how Sophia planned to wriggle out of this one. She pulled me into a half embrace, a grin spreading across her face. You've grown so much, Emma, but your sweet little compliments haven't changed a bit. The crowd looked on as we chatted, clearly confused. Few people here knew me, but there were even fewer who didn't recognize Vivian, Lucas's aunt. Lucas noticed what was happening and frantically sent Vivian silent looks, trying to signal her to de-escalate the situation before Mrs. Taylor returned. I think it's best if this young lady leaves the Taylor estate, he said firmly. With Lucas backing her, Sophia gained some courage. A few others, emboldened by his stance, chimed in. We don't welcome uninvited guests here. Who invited you? Leave now. Accusations flew, one after another, with many directing their disdain toward me. And where exactly are you planning to send my guest? Mrs. Taylor's voice cut through the noise, calm yet commanding. She had returned, her gown flowing elegantly as she strode into the room. Emma isn't going anywhere, she said firmly, her gaze sweeping across the room. She's my guest. The room fell silent as everyone's attention shifted to Sophia and Lucas. Waiting to see how they would respond, Sophia instinctively tried to retreat, but Lucas grabbed her arm, stopping her. Don't worry, Sophia, he said, trying to sound heroic. This time, I'll protect you. And just like that, the drama ramped up a notch. Here came Lucas's attempt to play the role of the devoted protector. Lucas, let go of me, Sophia hissed, trying to pull away. Mrs. Taylor's sharp tone made the situation crystal clear to everyone in the room. Emma is my guest. Sophia, I suggest you reconsider your actions. that moment, whispers began circulating through the crowd. Wait, could she really be the Green heiress? I've never seen the real heiress before, but the Green family's CEO is named Green. Isn't he? Mrs. Taylor, always poised, raised a hand to quiet the murmurs. Apologies, everyone, she said smoothly. It seems we have some personal matters to attend to. Please, enjoy the evening. I'll rejoin you shortly. Despite her polite dismissal, no one actually left the room. Everyone stayed, their curiosity overriding any sense of propriety as they strained to catch more details of the unfolding drama. Lucas, Mrs. Taylor said, her voice laced with exhaustion. I can't watch you ruin yourself over this liar any longer. If you're willing, I'll set aside my pride to negotiate a proper match for you. When the time is right, I'll even arrange your marriage. But if you insist on this delusion, I've had enough. I no longer consider you my son. The collective gasp in the room was deafening, and several glasses slipped from guests' hands, shattering on the floor. Disowning her only son in public was the kind of spectacle rarely seen in the elite circles. Mrs. Taylor, surely there's no need to be so harsh, one guest said, trying to smooth things over. Though I no longer harbored any feelings for Lucas, I still didn't want to see mother and son turn against each other. Mrs. Taylor had clearly reached her limit, but I had long since let go of the hope that her arrangements with Lucas would ever make me happy. Mom, you can't do this to Sophia, Lucas pleaded, his voice desperate. Mrs. Taylor turned her back to him, unwilling to entertain further arguments. Her usual grace had been overshadowed by the public embarrassment Sophia had caused. Mom, don't you remember? Sophia saved me that night, Lucas shouted, clinging to his last thread of justification. Sophia, ever the opportunist, seized this chance like a drowning woman grabbing a lifeline. Yes, Mrs. Taylor. It was me who stayed with Lucas that night when he passed out. I took care of him and called for help, she said tearfully, weaving her fabricated story with impressive confidence. There was no one home, so I had to call an ambulance myself. Her tearful performance might have been convincing if not for the glaring inconsistencies. Unfortunately for Sophia, the truth was that Vivian had opened the door for me that night. And it was Vivian who called the ambulance. Vivian's sharp voice cut through Sophia's tale like a knife. I opened the door that night. I called the ambulance. And if I recall correctly, it was Emma who stayed with Lucas the entire night. Not you, Miss Green. Sophia's face paled, her carefully constructed lie crumbling as gasps rippled through the room. Lucas visibly staggered, clutching the table for support. Unbelievable, someone murmured. So she lied about all of it? I couldn't resist letting out a low chuckle. Not just about that, I muttered under my breath. But this is only the beginning. Sophia, now exposed, clung to Lucas's arm desperately. Her teary eyes darted around, but there was no saving face. She had been caught red-handed. Vivian's words carried a finality that sealed Sophia's fate. Miss Green, perhaps next time, think twice before pretending to be someone you're not. Stealing someone's identity is bad enough. But stealing Emma's? You've overplayed your hand. Lucas looked utterly shattered. I couldn't help but think, not so perfect now, are you? He looked at me in disbelief, as though it was his birthright to paint me as some wicked villainess. The more Lucas tried to act clever, the more foolish he became. Vivian wasn't holding back. She unleashed a sharp rebuke at Lucas for his pathetic behavior. If there's a contest for the #1 critic of Lucas Taylor, I'd happily take second place, because no one could ever outdo you in self-sabotage. She spat, her voice dripping with disdain. So this is the real Green heiress? Someone murmured in the crowd. Exactly. How could the Taylor family ever allow someone like Sophia to become their daughter-in-law? Sophia, sensing the atmosphere shifting, attempted to slip away unnoticed, but the bodyguard at the door quickly stopped her. Disheveled and frantic, she now resembled a madwoman, her composure entirely shattered. Lucas's eyes were rimmed red, his mental state clearly unstable. He looked at me with a mix of emotions, regret, pain, frustration. But whatever it was, it didn't matter anymore. There was no way back for us. With the truth fully exposed, I called my father. Within minutes, I had a complete investigation report in my hands. It turned out that the woman Sophia had called earlier was a bartender she'd befriended, who also worked as a receptionist at Green Enterprises. They had conspired in advance to fake Sophia's identity, with Sophia promising her a handsome cut in exchange. Thankfully, the plan had been uncovered before any serious damage was done to my father's company. Once everything was clear, I called the police. Sophia was arrested for defamation and other criminal offenses. Her illegal dealings were revealed in the subsequent investigation. As the sound of police sirens faded into the distance, a wave of satisfaction washed over me. Every wrong she had done to me, every humiliation I endured, justice had finally been served. On the way to the airport, Summer revved up her bright pink Maserati, the engine roaring as loudly as her personality. She had just received her driver's license, and the excitement was still fresh. Her driving, however, made me clutch the door handle tightly. "Slow down, Summer. We're not in that much of a rush," I yelled, trying not to sound too desperate. But Summer, always defiant, gritted her teeth and pressed harder on the gas. "I'm not letting him catch up." "Who's chasing us?" I asked, confused. "That gray car behind us," she replied, nodding toward the rearview mirror. I turned to look. Sure enough, a dark gray Maybach was tailing us. Its presence was unmistakable. "That's Lucas's car," I exclaimed, recognizing the license plate. His serious expression confirmed it. "He made several attempts to overtake us but never quite managed to." "Is your ex-husband chasing you?" Summer asked, half joking. "Focus on the road," I snapped, not in the mood for her commentary. On the city's main highway, our two cars drew plenty of attention as we raced one another. But in the end, we reached the airport first. Boarding the plane, I saw Lucas being stopped outside security, his frustrated expression barely concealed. As soon as we were airborne, my phone lit up with a barrage of missed calls from Lucas. Without hesitation, I deleted his number and blocked him. For Mrs. Taylor's sake, let's make this the last time our lives intersect, I muttered to myself. From now on, you walk your path, and I'll walk mine. Summer leaned back in her seat, smirking. "Wow, Emma, you really don't hold back, do you? Straight up ruthless." I didn't bother explaining the full story to her. Some things were better left unsaid. After all, if Summer ever found out that Lucas had nearly killed me in our past life, she'd probably jump out of the plane and chase him down herself. "Men will stab you in the back without a second thought," Summer said dramatically. "But a best friend? She'll grab a knife and fight for you." Once we landed in Italy, the warm sunshine and gentle sea breeze greeted us. After settling into our villa, Summer wasted no time slipping into her swimsuit. "Out with the old, in with the new," she declared, running toward the beach. "A few kisses from these Italian hunks, and I'll forget everything." I chuckled as I watched her attempt to chat with a group of men using her broken English, which only made her more endearing. Meanwhile, I stretched out on a lounge chair, soaking in the rare sense of peace. As the evening approached, fatigue set in, and I decided to return to the villa early. When I reached the door, I noticed something unusual. The previously empty apartment next to ours now looked occupied. The dust and cobwebs were gone, replaced by a neat and tidy shoe rack. The transformation had occurred in just a single afternoon. Curious, I grabbed a small gift and knocked on the door, intending to introduce myself. Footsteps approached from inside, but no one answered. Strange, I thought. Maybe they're shy, or maybe I just don't look very friendly. I didn't think much of it and went back to my room, falling into such a deep sleep that I didn't wake until Summer flopped onto my bed. "Hey, dinner's here. It's at the door. Did you order it?" she asked, her voice full of excitement. Rubbing my eyes, I mumbled, "Dinner? I've been asleep this whole time. Maybe it's from the neighbors, and they left it at the wrong door. Should we check?" A few minutes later, Summer returned, holding the food in her hands with an expression of horror. "Emma, we're in trouble. Your ex-husband is here." I sat up in shock. "How do you know that? Didn't you notice? The umbrella on the rack outside. It's his." At her words, I collapsed back onto the bed with a groan. Great, he's back. And now we'll never shake him off. For the next few days, nothing much changed, except for the fact that wherever we went, Lucas seemed to follow. He never showed himself, though, which was at least something. Your ex has some self-awareness. I'll give him that, Summer remarked between bites of a cake Lucas had sent over. He knows if he shows up, it'll just annoy everyone. The cake came with a small note attached. Emma, if you like this, let me know. I've already gotten the recipe from the bakery for you. Without a second thought, I tossed the note into the trash. This was the 21st time this month he'd sent me something. Was this his idea of an apology? A desperate attempt at reconciliation? Lucas always lived in his delusional CEO fantasy world, where he thought he could fix everything by throwing grand gestures around. But he wasn't just apologizing to me. He owed that apology to our unborn child, to my parents, who had been forced to bury their daughter, and to himself, for destroying everything good in his life. His newfound sincerity came far too late. It was worth less than weeds. Eventually, Summer and I settled into our new lives at a university in England. Life became more stable. Our days were spent attending classes, while our evenings were filled with shopping, cooking, or watching movies at home. A fellow student from a poetry club asked me out a few times. He was the epitome of a gentleman, tall, handsome, wealthy, and soft-spoken, always considerate without ever crossing any lines. He seemed like the kind of Prince Charming most women dream about. One night, after a casual dinner, he walked me home. A light buzz from a bit of wine left me feeling slightly lightheaded. Just as we said goodbye, he leaned in and kissed me lightly on the lips before I could even react. Goodbye, he said softly, his tone casual. I froze for a second but quickly brushed it off. Maybe this was just how foreigners acted, open and straightforward. I didn't think much of it and still only saw him as a friend. As I approached my apartment door, I noticed a shadow in the hallway. The dim light made it hard to make out who it was. But before I could figure it out, I was suddenly pulled into the neighboring apartment. A strange, warm sensation pressed against my lips, and I instinctively pushed against the person holding me. What are you doing? Let go of me, I demanded. In the pale moonlight streaming through the window, I finally saw his face. Lucas. His eyes were red-rimmed, filled with suppressed emotions that threatened to spill over. Why did you let him kiss you? He asked, his voice trembling. It's all my fault. I know I was wrong. Please, Emma, give me another chance. I'll make it up to you. I'll treat you better. Just give me one more chance. His voice cracked with desperation, and warm tears fell onto my neck. His arms tightened around my waist, making it difficult for me to breathe. This is how you show you're sorry? I asked coldly, forcing myself to calm down. My words seemed to strike him. His grip loosened, and he stepped back, retreating to a corner like a wounded animal. I'm sorry. I lost control again. It won't happen again, he said, his voice barely audible. Lucas, who once carried an air of arrogance and dominance, now looked utterly defeated. But I no longer felt anything for him. Not anger, not pity, not even the faintest flicker of affection. He was a man who would always be ruled by his impulsive, immature emotions. Saying nothing more, I turned and left, shutting the door firmly behind me. From that day on, Lucas stopped hiding. He began openly following me around, no longer bothering to mask his presence. Seriously, Lucas, Summer groaned after days of his relentless tailing. You're a rich, handsome guy. You can have anyone you want. So why are you stalking us? Her tone was sharp, but Lucas simply smiled and continued trailing behind us. Wherever we went, he paid for everything, quietly taking care of our bills. First, we tried to ignore him, hoping he'd eventually give up. But when he enrolled in the same class as me and joined the same club, even I couldn't keep my composure. In a quaint cafe where soft violin music played in the background, Lucas sat across from us during a poetry club meeting. Summer and I exchanged exasperated looks, neither of us able to enjoy the coffee in front of us. Don't you think it's time to give up, Lucas? Summer finally said, her tone a mix of frustration and exhaustion. A flicker of something dark passed through Lucas's eyes. Emma, why is he always with you? He asked, his voice low. That's none of your business, I replied coldly, turning my back on him. He immediately revealed his true colors. his tone sharp and accusatory. But he's trying to take Emma away. You're supposed to be my girlfriend. Po, the poetry club member, didn't understand Chinese. And Summer's English wasn't great. He kept gesturing and whispering to her, asking what Lucas was saying. Chinese? Confused? You can. Summer attempted to explain with her limited vocabulary, waving him off dismissively. I didn't bother responding. Lucas couldn't hold back his laughter as he watched Poe's puzzled expression. For the past few weeks, Lucas had been putting on his best domesticated man act, cooking, cleaning, and practically attaching himself to a mop. The moment he heard we were going out, he'd drop everything and follow us, as though expecting praise for his efforts. Emma might not like the food here, Lucas began, trying to insert himself into the conversation. I made soup at home. When will you be back to drink it? Summer, clearly out of patience. Shop back. We can cook for ourselves. Lucas pressed on. I also made desserts. Your favorites. Emma. As he spoke, he subtly adjusted his sleeve to reveal a fresh burn scar on his hand, the bright red mark standing out against his skin. But no matter how much effort he put in, I wasn't the person I used to be. His attempts at redemption fell on deaf ears. When no one acknowledged him, Lucas suddenly slammed his hand on the table, drawing the attention of everyone in the restaurant. We assumed he was about to lose his temper and cause a scene. But to our surprise, he dropped to one knee and pulled out a shiny object from his pocket. His face was determined, almost desperate. Emma, I've been wrong in so many ways. I've done everything for you lately, even kneeling today. Please, give me another chance. Stop. Just stop. I interrupted, my voice cold. Don't talk to me like you're doing me some grand favor. I never asked you to kneel. I don't care about any of this. Lucas froze, his outstretched hand trembling slightly. I got up, motioning for Summer and Poe to follow. Poe didn't understand the words exchanged, but he had a protective look on his face as he stayed close to my side. Lucas grabbed my arm as I turned to leave. Did you sleep with him? He demanded, his voice low and venomous. You never used to reject me like this. His words sent a chill through the restaurant. Whispers began to ripple through the room. You can't force her, someone muttered. That man's expression is terrifying. Should we call the police? Another whispered. He seems unstable. Another voice added. Lucas clearly understood the comments and, not wanting to escalate things further, reluctantly let go of me. As I walked away, I realized something with absolute clarity. Lucas was hopelessly trapped in his own delusions. He couldn't see beyond his own stubbornness, his own need to cling to a version of the past that no longer existed. Later, Summer remarked, Poe's kind, gentle, and charming. Most importantly, he treats you well. There's no reason not to like him. Exactly, I replied. Summer added, her tone sharper. Lucas, on the other hand, isn't in love with you. He's just in love with the idea of getting you back. It's all about his own pride. The truth hit Lucas harder than anything else. Unable to contain his frustration, he lashed out but was quickly subdued by Poe and escorted out. Few days later, he appeared again, dressed to impress, driving a luxury car in some misguided attempt to win me back. But his antics only drew scorn, and a blonde woman scolded him so harshly that he finally backed down. Not long after, the Taylor family cut off his credit cards. Without financial support, Lucas disappeared entirely. Meanwhile, the apartment next to ours returned to its vacant state. The furniture moved out. Summer later told me that Lucas had returned to his home country, where his life had spiraled further downhill. His parents had completely given up on him, choosing to groom a new heir instead. Lucas, unable to adjust to life without his wealth and privilege, spent his days drowning his sorrows in alcohol. As for Sophia, she had married the same man as in our past life, but her old habits of lying and scamming caught up with her, and she was eventually beaten to death by him during a dispute over money. The tattooed thugs who worked for her husband turned their frustrations on Lucas, frequently causing him trouble in the hopes of recovering their losses. When I heard all of this, I didn't know how to feel. This was the life they were always meant to have. As for me and Summer, our lives moved steadily forward. Between school and traveling, We filled our days with new experiences and adventures. My long-held dream of seeing the world, delayed by a lifetime, finally came true. The road stretched ahead of us, and for the first time, I could truly say it was ours to control. After 20 years of a loveless marriage, I unexpectedly got a second chance. When I was reborn, I found myself in the middle of divorcing Jack. The reason? He secretly brought his ex-girlfriend, Jenna Monroe, into the company and promoted her to the position of financial director, without following any standard procedures. That caused the most intense argument we'd ever had, and after he stormed out, I ran straight to the hospital and terminated the pregnancy. When I opened my eyes again, I saw the familiar wall calendar and realized I'd returned to 1988. With my head still heavy and aching, I staggered out of the bedroom. The living room was filled with the overwhelming smell of cigarettes. Jack was slouched lazily on the sofa, his long legs resting on the coffee table, puffing on one cigarette after another. The smoke curled between his fingers. Maybe it was the sensitivity of pregnancy or simply being fed up with the same smell for years, but I suddenly felt nauseous. Hearing me retching, Jack turned his head to glance at me, then slowly got up and walked over. His sharp features were as defined as ever, yet he never put out the cigarette in his hand. I threw up until nothing but bile remained, rinsed my mouth, and looked up into the mirror. The reflection staring back at me was young, so young that for a moment, I was dazed. It was the hottest time of the year in Canton. The balcony was stifling without a breeze. Jack leaned lazily against the railing, looking completely unbothered, exuding an air of indifference. Taking a deep breath, I spoke calmly. Jack, let's get a divorce. Tomorrow morning at 10. Let's finalize it at the Civil Affairs Bureau. There's no point in torturing each other anymore. Without giving him a chance to speak, I lowered my eyes and continued. I know there's nothing going on between you and Jenna Monroe, but I really don't want to keep arguing about her. I refuse to waste the next several decades of my life on you, because you're just not worth it. Seeing that Jack remained silent, I looked up at him and added, deliberately slow, I'll go to the hospital this afternoon to deal with the baby. Let's part ways peacefully. Once we're divorced, you can be with whoever you want. Jenna Monroe, or any of the girls at your company. I don't care. Hearing this, Jack finally reacted. His gaze darkened as he studied my face, seemingly trying to find some clue about my intentions. A moment later, he flicked the ash off his cigarette and sneered with disdain. Really? Playing hard to get? That doesn't suit you. I couldn't be bothered to argue with him and simply muttered, "Oh," before grabbing my worn-out handbag, ready to leave. Seeing I was serious, Jack suddenly grabbed my arm, his face twisted in irritation. Stop this nonsense. Lauren, you know very well Jenna and I are innocent. Do you have any idea how ridiculous you look right now? My company is at a critical stage. I don't have time for your little games. Besides, you don't have a job or any savings. And now you're talking about getting rid of my child? Where do you get the nerve? He paused, as if something had just occurred to him, and then stared at me suspiciously. I yanked my arm free and slapped him across the face. With a cold smile, I said, Jack, do you know what I hate most about you? Your arrogance. Your delusions. In my past life, Jack had repeated countless times that he and Jenna Monroe were innocent, but I had always treated his words like a joke. I knew the truth. They had used their so-called friendship as a cover for their constant ambiguity. The whispers in the company, the accidental sharing of a wine glass, the casual physical touches, they reveled in the thrill of it. Jack was no exception to the inherent flaws of men. Steadying my emotions, I took a deep breath and said resolutely, I'm divorcing you no matter what. I'm not keeping the child, either. I knew I was being cruel to the baby growing inside me, but I couldn't let Jack destroy me a second time. In my previous life, it took me nearly 10 years to realize that Jack never truly loved me. He pursued and married me out of spite because Jenna Monroe had chosen the son of his superior instead of him, bruised his ego, to get back at her and his so-called friends who mocked him. He set his sights on me. Back then, I was 18. I was beautiful and confident, pursued by many, a recognized belle at the textile factory. I was also the first girl in the factory to wear a dress, high-heeled leather shoes, and a perm with cascading waves to work. Back then, I imagined countless versions of my future, only to have all of them destroyed by Jack. After we got married, because I wasn't the woman he truly wanted, because there was never any love. He never cared about my feelings. At the time, I didn't understand. All I knew was to vent my anxiety by smashing things, acting hysterical. It wasn't until I saw him with Jenna Monroe that everything became clear. The moment Jenna got divorced, he used the excuse of friendship to bring her into the company. He even secretly rented out the apartment we'd been given as a benefit by the textile factory to her. Calling it rent was laughable. He never let me see a single cent of it. He treated her with such care, as if he were afraid to offend her, even when his nicotine cravings hit. He held back and refused to smoke around her. As his construction company grew and his wealth skyrocketed, he started taking her to high-end events, introducing her to his business partners and friends. None of them knew I existed. To them, Jenna Monroe was Jack's most capable assistant, his confidant. Even on the night I fell down the stairs and woke up in this second life, Jack had been with her, helping her expand her network, preparing to invest in a business just for her. In Jack's heart, I was nothing but a placeholder, the mother of his child, the woman cooking his meals at home. Jenna was the one standing by his side, the one he truly wanted, his first love. When he faced me, he always said things like, "You don't understand," with an expression full of impatience and disdain. He would slam the door and leave. Every single time. "Is this really necessary?" he would sigh, pinching the bridge of his nose with obvious irritation. "Lauren, you should feel lucky. I provide you with good food and a comfortable life. You don't have to work or degrade yourself by drinking with clients. What more do you want?" When I was pregnant and bled from overexertion, I quit my job at the textile factory under Jack's persuasion and became a housewife. After the baby was born, I was overwhelmed, barely getting any sleep, losing handfuls of hair, and struggling to keep up with everything. But to Jack, it was all natural. In his eyes, I was just a lazy freeloader who stayed at home all day. To everyone else, he painted himself as the perfect husband. "Lauren stays home, and I take care of everything outside. I live like a king." He belittled me, made me dependent on him, while at the same time praising Jenna Monroe for her career abilities and independence. Snapping back to the present, I masked my emotions and nodded sarcastically. "Yes, you're right. I'm not satisfied. That's why we should finalize the divorce as soon as possible. That way, you can go find the little woman who wholeheartedly depends on you." Jack, thinking I was jealous, smirked and let out a mocking laugh. Loosening his collar, he said dismissively, "If you're so determined to divorce me, suit yourself. Just don't come crawling back with regrets." He turned, using the company as an excuse to leave. "Wait," I said coolly. "Before you go, sign the agreement." Jack paused, taking the divorce papers from me. When he read through them, his face froze in disbelief, his dark gaze turning colder by the second. Gritting his teeth, he spat. "Lauren, you're unbelievable." I smiled faintly. "Right back at you." Seeing that Jack hesitated to sign, I taunted him with a smirk. "What's the matter? You can't bear to let me go." "Don't flatter yourself." Jack shot back, his pride clearly wounded. Jack was always the domineering type. He hated losing face, especially with me. What he truly hesitated over wasn't me, but the baby I was carrying. Fueled by anger, he finally scrawled his name on the papers. I carefully tucked the signed agreement into my bag and said flatly, "Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, Civil Affairs Bureau." Before I could finish, the door slammed shut behind him with a deafening thud. That sound marked Jack's last departure as my husband, a clear sign that I had thoroughly enraged him. After Jenna Monroe's divorce, she had forcefully inserted herself into our lives. Jack and I had fought over it countless times, but because of the elders' persuasion and, more importantly, the baby growing inside me, the divorce had never happened. Jack knew I wouldn't dare terminate the pregnancy, so he always thought I had no way out. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't going to let him destroy me again. I used to think I loved him so much that he could act without restraint, taking everything for granted. After a simple lunch, I went to the hospital. By the time I walked out, The child in my belly was gone. In my previous life. Because Jack and I had an unhappy marriage. Our child had been especially sensitive. Every time I even thought of divorce, Jack would use fear to manipulate him, saying that I didn't want him anymore. I always gave in to protect him from getting hurt, from being caught in the crossfire. That one mistake led to more and more until, by the time I finally saw Jack for who he was, I was too old to turn back. Why should I let him achieve success and then step aside, making room for him and Jenna Monroe to live happily ever after? As long as I didn't divorce him, I would still be Mrs. Carter. Without love, at least I would have money and a comfortable life. My daughter would also remain the sole heir to his wealth. But now that I've been given a second chance, I've removed that weakness myself. I just hope that child finds a happy family in another life, with loving parents who won't subject him to a lifetime of pain. At this moment, the country's economy was booming. Opportunities were everywhere. It was time for me to cut my losses and become the brave, fearless Lauren I used to be. Perhaps to avoid seeing me, Jack didn't come home all night. The next morning, as I sat at the Civil Affairs Bureau, I called him. He had just woken up, and I could faintly hear a woman's playful laughter in the background. It was Jenna Monroe's voice. "Lauren, can you stop making a scene?" Jack said impatiently. "I pulled an all-nighter signing a big contract. I'm exhausted." Hearing that, I took a deep breath, my voice laced with sarcasm. "Exhausted? I'd say you're exhausted from the bed you were in." "Right." The staff at the Civil Affairs Bureau exchanged glances, clearly intrigued by the drama they were overhearing. Jack, too, lost his patience on the other end. He let out a cold laugh, his voice dripping with venom. "Lauren, aren't you just using the child in your belly to control me? You think I'll put up with all this because of the baby, don't you? I've given you enough respect because of it. So don't push your luck. You're becoming unbearable." Jack was always so arrogant, convinced that everything was supposed to go his way. He never reflected on himself, never questioned his actions. Tired of this pointless back and forth, I said flatly, "Well, that's unfortunate. The child you're talking about is already gone." Yesterday, before 3 p.m., the line went silent for a moment. Then, I heard Jenna Monroe scream in shock. Jack must have pushed her aside because the next thing I knew, he was on his way to the Civil Affairs Bureau. He stormed in a full 30 minutes later. His entire body reeked of cigarettes and alcohol, his bloodshot eyes blazing with anger. "Lauren, what did you do?" he roared, his face twisted in rage. I stepped back, putting distance between us, and waved him off casually. "What's there to be afraid of? You've already got your mistress on the side, one who once abandoned you, no less. Compared to you, I'd say I'm a saint. I told you there's nothing going on." Jack snapped. "I promoted Jenna because she's capable and qualified. Why do you always have to think the worst?" Jack tried to calm himself, pinching the bridge of his nose with frustration, as if I was being unreasonable. Just then, a couple of bystanders opened their mouths to urge us to reconcile, but I cut them off coldly. "The factory apartment? The lipstick stains on your shirt? The matching outfits that are just coincidentally a couple's set? Tell me, Jack, what did I accuse you of wrongly?" Jack froze, unable to respond, but it didn't take long for him to recover his composure. His voice was laced with disdain as he sneered. "So you killed my child over a misunderstanding? Lauren, how could you be so cruel?" I didn't answer. Jack could say whatever he wanted. I was beyond caring. As for Jenna Monroe, she wasn't even worth mentioning. I have nothing to say. There's nothing going on between me and her. You're just too sensitive, blowing things out of proportion, Jack said, his tone so self-righteous it made my skin crawl. To him, my pain and breakdowns were simply me making trouble for no reason. But no one knew better than I did. Even if Jack hadn't outright cheated yet, his tolerance for Jenna Monroe's constant advances was undeniable. He welcomed her attention, every look, every smile. After all, she was his first love, the one he couldn't have in his youth. Her fawning and groveling fed his ego, made him feel powerful, as if he had finally won. I let out a cold laugh. "Well, then I guess I wronged you. But you've already signed the divorce papers. What makes you think I owe you anything? Why should I keep bearing your children? It's broad daylight. Jack, what kind of daydream are you having?" I pulled out the divorce agreement, making sure it was visible, and Jack instantly froze. The reality of the situation seemed to hit him all at once as he stared at the papers. His face blank. You really did this? His question was rhetorical, his tone certain. Yes, I did. I shot back, my voice calm but firm. Why should I sacrifice my life just because of a child? Why should I work myself to the bone for someone who doesn't even respect me? Someone who treats me like I'm useless? Did you forget, Jack? I used to work as a designer in the textile factory. I made over $100 a month with commissions. Half of your startup money came from me. I gave up everything for you. And look where it got me. What are you going to give me in return? So now you're blaming me, he muttered, furrowing his brows, completely clueless as to why I was saying this. Looking at Jack, who refused to see any fault in himself, I felt a sudden wave of exhaustion. I turned my eyes away, handed the divorce papers to the staff, and said softly, shouldn't I blame you? You couldn't forget Jenna Monroe, yet you still married me, even when I was pregnant, when I couldn't eat, when I was constantly sinking into inexplicable sadness. You still tangled yourself up with her. You brought her into your company, put her right in front of me just to spite me. Don't you think you've gone too far, Jack? Don't you think you're being cruel? Unable to hold it in any longer, I lowered my head and began to cry. The sobs poured out of me, taking with them the suffocating weight in my chest. For the first time, I let myself release everything I'd been holding in. Jack seemed startled to see me crying. He hesitated as if he wanted to step forward, but my retreating steps made him stop short. Finally, I raised my head, tears still streaking my face, and said quietly, Jack, just let me go. You know what? Watching you cling on like this is absolutely disgusting. Jack had always been proud and self-centered. Hearing me say that pushed him over the edge. His expression twisted into a sneer. Fine, he spat venomously. Let's divorce. Whoever backs out first is a coward. The divorce procedures were over quickly. Within minutes, I held the divorce certificate in my hand. Jack's face remained stormy as he turned and walked away without looking back. I watched his retreating figure for a moment before dropping my gaze and walking off in the opposite direction. After the divorce, I left with $50,000 and the company apartment Jenna Monroe had been living in. Even though the thought of her having stayed there disgusted me, the property was worth far more than cash. In a few years, when real estate prices in Canton skyrocketed, that apartment would make me a small fortune. Word of my divorce from Jack spread like wildfire through the textile factory. Jenna Monroe, of course, pretended to be oblivious and refused to move out of the apartment. I didn't bother arguing. Instead, I hired a group of strong men to help her move. The moment her belongings started piling up in the courtyard, Jenna, wearing a white blouse and a tight black skirt, rushed back. She nearly lost her mind when she saw the mess. What are you doing? Don't touch my things, she screamed, standing in the doorway to block their way. This is illegal. I'll call the police. But the men ignored her, brushing her aside like she was nothing. Ma'am, step aside. We're just doing our job. Stop. I said stop, Jenna shouted, red-faced and furious. By the time most of her things were out, I walked out of the bedroom, my posture calm and composed, and looked her straight in the eye. Jenna, I said lightly, you're not the mistress here anymore. I think it's time you moved on. She turned to glare at me, shaking with anger. I'm not a mistress. Nothing happened between me and Jack. We're innocent. I smiled faintly, my tone dripping with mockery. Innocent? Is that what you call it? Why are you slandering me like this? Jenna Monroe shot back, her voice trembling with indignation. She looked utterly humiliated, her eyes reddening as though I'd dealt her the greatest injustice. Her whole demeanor screamed fragility, like a porcelain doll on the verge of cracking. I wasn't moved. Rolling my eyes, I sneered. Give it a rest. Jenna, if you're not Jack's mistress, then why are you living here rent-free? Hearing that, the crowd of onlookers, neighbors who had gathered to watch the scene, began whispering to each other. So she really hasn't been paying rent? If that's the case, their relationship must be fishy. No wonder Lauren divorced him. Even the mistress moved in. Shua, stop talking. Jack's here. The murmurs quieted when Jack appeared. He looked far more disheveled than the last time I saw him. His stubble was unkempt, his face gaunt, and the stench of cigarettes and alcohol clung to him like a second skin. Was all this really necessary? Lauren? Jack asked, his tone low as he immediately took Jenna's side. The thought of him siding with her while she was still living in my apartment made me sick to my stomach. Everything about it, the space she occupied, the air she breathed, felt tainted. Jenna, who had been glaring at me like she wanted to tear me apart, was suddenly restrained by Jack. He turned his eyes to me, a strange curve to his lips. Then he spoke as if humoring me. Fine. As you wish. Jack turned to Jenna with a softer tone. Jenna, I'll find you another place to stay. Somewhere better than this. Don't worry. As he spoke, his eyes flickered toward me, holding a silent challenge, as if daring me to react. I didn't bother to look at him, turning my face aside. I caught sight of Jenna, whose cheeks flushed a delicate pink. She was smiling sweetly, as if imagining some romantic future. Thank you, Jack, she said, her voice soft, syrupy, and nauseating. If it weren't for you, I don't know what I would have done. The two of them flirted openly in front of me, their words tinged with ambiguity. I had lived through this kind of nonsense in my previous life by now. It didn't faze me. Instead, I gave an exaggerated shiver and muttered, disgusting. If you two want to cozy up to each other, go do it somewhere else. Don't dirty my sight. I personally saw to it that Jenna was driven out of the apartment that day, her belongings unceremoniously tossed outside. Jack left with her, but before he did, he shot me a look that I couldn't quite read, some mix of anger and something else. When news of my divorce spread through the textile factory, my parents demanded I reconcile with Jack. They went so far as to threaten to disown me if I refused. Their behavior no different from my past life. Every marriage has its ups and downs, my father lectured. You can't just talk about divorce every time you're angry. That's ridiculous. My mother paced back and forth in front of me, sighing incessantly. I finally snapped, unable to hold it in any longer. Mom, do you know Jack is still tangled up with his ex Jenna Monroe? She got divorced. And he immediately ran back to her, all eager and happy. After everything he's done to humiliate me, why should I have to put up with it? My mother's face fell, but she muttered. But nothing happened, did it? Jack said she was just going through a hard time, and he was helping her out. And while you were pregnant, he made sure you had the best food and rest. He's always treated you well. Compared to most women, you're living a good life. Her voice softened as she continued. Lauren, sometimes you have to turn a blind eye. Not everything has to be so black and white. You don't need to make such a fuss over it. She sighed heavily, her expression full of worry. Your father and I are getting old. In the future, the only people you'll be able to rely on are Jack and your child. But you, my father, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke. Marriage isn't a game. Lauren, if there's a chance to reconcile, then do it. I think that boy still cares about you. Otherwise, he wouldn't have come here to talk to us. He still treats us like his in-laws. Watching my parents, I realized they'd completely fallen for Jack's act, just as they had in my past life. I had no patience left for persuasion. I said firmly, it's impossible. I've already terminated the child. How could I start over with him again? Everyone knows you can't take back water that's been spilled. In my past life, I lacked the courage to act. I was always hesitating, too soft, too indecisive, and it cost me everything. If, after reliving my life, I chose the same path, willingly humiliating myself again, then I deserve whatever misery came my way. Ever since I quit my job due to pregnancy, Jack had looked down on me. He compared me to other women constantly, treating me like some sort of ornament he was forced to provide for. I depended on him financially while he kept his ex on the side. He wanted the perfect setup. Stability at home while he enjoyed excitement elsewhere. It was as if he thought he could have it all. I knew that after my divorce. The neighbors were laughing at me behind my back. Don't worry, I told them with a mocking smile. I'll be leaving Canton in a couple of days. You won't have to see me anymore. Out of sight, out of mind. I had made up my mind to leave for Beijing. Not only would it allow me to break free from Jack completely, But it would also save my parents and sister-in-law from the constant tension my presence caused. My extended family had an aunt who'd married and moved to Beijing, so I wouldn't be entirely alone. I bought a train ticket for the following morning and arranged to rent out the apartment I'd reclaimed from Jenna Monroe. I told no one about my departure plans. Canton was a city full of opportunities during its economic boom, and I knew I couldn't leave empty-handed. The day before I left, I went to the textile factory to wholesale some new clothing designs to bring with me to Beijing. I sought out my closest friend from the factory, Xiang. When she heard about my plans, she was the only one who didn't try to talk me out of it. Ever since Jack had made money in business, everyone blamed me for our divorce. "You don't know how lucky you are," they would say. "You're useless. Couldn't even hold on to your husband." Xiang, though, simply said, "This is how you're supposed to be." Just those few words gave me immense courage. She was right. I used to be fearless, willing to try anything. We finalized our business arrangement, with Xiang agreeing to collect rent on my behalf, and I headed to a nearby supermarket to pick up supplies for the journey. There, I unexpectedly ran into Jack. He was buying cigarettes, surrounded by his sycophantic friends who followed him like shadows. "Jack, are you really going to marry Jenna Monroe?" one of them teased, nudging him with a smirk. "Everyone's talking about it." Hearing that, Jack's hand froze mid-motion as he picked up the cigarette pack. His face darkened, and his voice was sharp. "What nonsense are you spouting? There's nothing going on between us." Noticing Jack's sour mood, another guy, yellow hair, quickly tried to smooth things over. "Yeah, exactly. That woman's already been married once. She's not good enough for you, Jack." Unfortunately, his words hit a nerve. Jack's face twisted, and without warning, he kicked yellow hair hard in the shin. "Who the hell are you calling second hand?" he snarled. "Don't get me wrong, Jack. I didn't mean you." Yellow hair stammered, trying to backpedal, realizing what he'd implied. His expression changed as he cautiously tested the waters. "So, Jack, are you planning to get back together with Lauren?" Jack didn't answer, but he didn't deny it either. Yellow hair's eyes widened in surprise. "You know, Jack, Lauren's actually pretty great. She's beautiful, knows how to manage a household. Getting back together wouldn't be such a bad idea. I heard she hasn't found a job yet. If you show up for her now, while she's at her lowest, you could probably win her back easily." Before Jack could respond, one of his other friends, a man in a floral shirt with slicked back hair, interrupted with a sneer. "Win her back? What nonsense. You're too naive. You don't spoil women like that, or they'll just walk all over you. Jack, let her suffer a bit. When she's had enough, she'll come crawling back on her own." Jack lit a cigarette, took a slow drag, and nodded in agreement, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "You're right. Once she's had her fill of hardship, she'll come back to me. I've got time to wait." They paid for their things and left, still laughing and chatting. I stayed hidden in the corner, watching them walk away, my lips curling into a bitter, sarcastic smile. The next morning, before sunrise, I grabbed my suitcase and made my way to the train station. After days of traveling, I finally arrived in Beijing. A week later, with the help of my aunt, I began to settle into my new life. I rented a small house in an alley near my aunt's place and started selling clothes at the market. Although it was exhausting, there was no shortage of business in Beijing. Clothing and small accessories from the south were popular here, and my entire stock would sell out within 2 weeks. When I finally recouped my costs and started turning a profit, I called Xiang and asked her to send me a new batch of the latest styles by train. Hearing how well the clothes were selling in Beijing, Xiang was thrilled. After we wrapped up the business talk, she suddenly changed the topic, her voice turning lighthearted. "Lauren, have you heard about Jack and Jenna Monroe?" Caught off guard by the mention of those two names, I froze for a moment. In the busy days I'd had since leaving Canton, I rarely thought about the past anymore, including my previous life. After all, people need to live in the present. I'd been given the rare chance to start over. I couldn't allow myself to get caught up in past grievances or wallow in self-pity. Lowering my eyes, I asked half-heartedly, "No, what happened?" Hearing my question, Xiang's gossipy side kicked in, and she excitedly said, "After you left, Jenna Monroe tried to become the real lady boss of Jack's company. She went all out to seduce him, but for some reason, Jack kept her at arm's length, neither hot nor cold. Then, get this, she tried to drug him, and it backfired. Jack fired her on the spot, and he ended up in the hospital. Jenna lost her job, ruined her reputation, and now she's hiding at home in shame. Serves her right. Asyong paused for a moment before continuing with a note of concern. Oh, and one more thing. Jack's company has been shifting its focus recently. I heard he's planning to move operations to Beijing. I don't know who he's connected with, but it seems like he's serious about expanding here. If you don't want to get involved with him again, you should be careful. Got it. Thanks. Asyong, I replied. After hanging up, I couldn't help but sigh. What a mess. I never like to assume the worst, but knowing Jack, there was no way this was a coincidence. He must have heard about my whereabouts through my parents, but what I couldn't understand was why he refused to let me go. Was it because his pride couldn't handle losing to me? Winter in Beijing was bitterly cold. Snow blanketed the streets, and I started selling winter clothes, down jackets and cotton coats. That were all the rage. I didn't want to deal with any comments from friends or relatives, so I decided not to return to Canton for the new year. Instead, I wired 300 yuan to my parents for the holidays. On the morning of New Year's Day, I didn't set up my stall. Instead, my aunt, who enjoyed her small luxuries, insisted on dressing me up. I wore a light gray turtleneck sweater under a black coat, paired with dark blue jeans and ankle boots. My hair was tied into a simple bun, revealing a small stretch of pale neck. My face had a light touch of makeup, soft and natural. Finally, my aunt replaced my earrings with small pearl studs, then stepped back to admire her work. Money isn't everything. You know, you're in the prime of your life. Don't waste your beauty, she said, satisfied. If I were your age, I'd dress up every day. Not like you, running around in those drab tracksuits all the time. You've still got the best taste. Auntie, I replied with a smile, wrapping a scarf around my neck to appease her. I had to admit, with her touch, I looked refined and confident, far better than usual. It was after I left a clothing store, weighed down with bags of new outfits, that I ran into Jack. I hadn't noticed him at first, but he was hard to ignore. His cold, sharp gaze stopped me in my tracks, sending a chill through me as though I'd been doused in ice water. The street around us fell silent, and within seconds, he strode over and grabbed my wrist tightly. I struggled, but his grip was unrelenting. Jack's dark eyes scanned me from head to toe, his face darkening as he sneered. All dressed up like this. Who are you trying to impress? And smiling so brightly too. Funny how your face fell the moment you saw me. What? Do I disgust you that much? Let go, I said coldly, glaring at him. But Jack's gaze only grew more dangerous, as if he were ready to tear me apart. He was truly enraged this time. I stopped resisting and stood still, quietly waiting for him to calm down. After a moment, Jack's composure returned, though barely. He reached out and cupped my face, forcing me to look into his eyes. His voice was low, almost pleading. Lauren, I regret it. I regret divorcing you. I don't care about the child anymore. If we remarry, you can decide whether you want more children or not. If you want to work, I'll support you completely. Anything you want, I'll agree to. Hearing such words from Jack's mouth felt like a miracle. In my past life, even when I made a fortune in stocks and invested it in a milk tea shop, he had dismissed me, calling me naive. The very sight of him now filled me with disgust. I turned my head slightly, restraining the anger bubbling inside me, and finally said in a calm voice, Jack, we're already divorced. We're nothing to each other now. Don't make this harder. You should move on. But I can't, he said stubbornly. His eyes lingered on me as his Adam's apple bobbed. Lauren, let's start over. I know I did so many things wrong in the past, but I never wanted to betray you. Jenna Monroe. She was a moment of stupidity, a way to satisfy my ridiculous pride. I don't care about her anymore. I fired her. I swear she'll never appear in front of you again. I married you because I liked you, not for any other reason. I looked at him for a long moment before speaking. My voice was steady but cold. Whether you regret it or not doesn't matter anymore. I don't love you anymore, Jack. A marriage without love is just an empty shell. For over 20 years, I lived like a widow, 2 lifetimes of a hollow marriage. I've had enough. Before he could respond, a gentle voice broke the tense silence. Lauren. I turned to see James, standing at the corner of the store with his 4-year-old daughter, Lily, the little girl, holding a string of candied hawthorns, spotted me and squealed in delight. Daddy, it's Auntie Lauren. She let go of his hand and ran toward me. James quickly stopped her, his face warm and calm as always. Jack's expression twisted immediately. His dark eyes flickered with something sharp, and his lips curled into a mocking smile. So that's what this is. You really do have someone new. Huh, Lauren, you're refusing me for a second-hand man? You'd rather be a stepmother? How cheap can you be? His words cut like a knife, sharp and cruel. I took a deep breath, lifting my chin as I looked him straight in the eye. With a steady voice, I said, "You're absolutely right. I'd rather be someone else's stepmother, have someone else's children, than ever go back to you or have your child again." Jack's eyes darkened even further, his gaze venomous. My words had hit him where it hurt most, piercing straight through his pride. Sensing his hesitation, I pried his fingers off my arm one by one and shoved his hand away. The walk back with James and Lily felt slightly awkward. After a moment of silence, I finally spoke, my tone lighter. That was my ex-husband just now. He's a bit unstable. I said those things to make him leave, so don't take it seriously. Okay. I tapped my forehead awkwardly, as if to explain away the situation. James chuckled softly, his smile gentle. Don't worry. I didn't take it to heart. I smiled, feeling a little more at ease. I had met James through his daughter, Lily, and it wasn't until later that I learned he was a university professor, one of the most promising young men in the area. He carried himself with a calm, scholarly elegance, like a gentleman straight out of a book. If it hadn't been for the divorce caused by his wife's desire to go abroad, their family of 3 would probably have been happy together. Lost in thought, I didn't notice James glancing at me, as if hesitating to say something. It wasn't until Lily ran off to buy a set of knitting needles from a nearby vendor that I felt James stop beside me. The small alley was full of children's laughter, echoing off the snow-dusted walls. James suddenly turned to me and said softly, "Lauren, about what you said earlier." Before he could finish, I gasped, "Oh, it's snowing again." I stretched out my hand, letting the delicate snowflakes land on my palm. The cold bit into my skin, but I couldn't bear to pull my hand away. "You know," I murmured softly. It wasn't until I came here that I saw snow for the first time. White as far as the eye could see, painting a scene straight out of a dream. I blinked, then turned to James with a smile. "Oh, by the way, I'm moving soon. I bought a small storefront with living quarters on Huan Street. I plan to run my business there. Other than visiting my family, I probably won't come back here much." I glanced at Lily, who was playing nearby, and added softly, "She's a sweet girl, but kids can be careless. Make sure you and your family keep an eye on her. You can't be too careful these days." James was smart. He caught the meaning behind my words instantly. After a long pause, he withdrew his gaze and looked ahead at Lily, a faint smile on his lips. "Then I'll wish you success in advance. May your business flourish." "Thanks for the good wishes," I replied, smiling lightly. I walked over to Lily, crouched down, and tucked a red envelope into the pocket of her coat. After saying goodbye, I quickly made my way back to my aunt's courtyard. Only then did I let out a long breath of relief. Inside, my aunt was reclining on a rocking chair, listening to the radio. When she heard me come in, she turned her head with a grin. "Did you have fun today?" "Just now, Mrs. Lee came by and told me she saw you walking back with that young man James from next door." Before she could say anything more, I waved my hands defensively. No, it's not like that. We just bumped into each other on the way back. And Lily was with him, too." Seeing my flustered expression, my aunt sighed deeply and couldn't resist offering her thoughts. "Lauren, for someone who's been divorced, James is a great choice. Yes, he has a 4-year-old daughter, but Lily is well behaved and really likes you. You won't have to worry about getting along with her. I've lived here for over 30 years. And I know the James family well. His parents are reasonable. And James himself is a good man with a solid character. You're a woman. There's no need to carry the world on your shoulders. Think about it. Won't you? I knew my aunt meant well. After all, most people still had limited views on marriage and relationships. Far less open-minded than they'd be 20 years later. And she was right. Lily was a sweet child. But becoming someone's stepmother wasn't something I could accept. I didn't want to sound too harsh. Especially since her advice came from a place of love. So I sat down beside her, looped my arm through hers, and spoke gently but firmly. Auntie, no matter how good James and his family are, being with him would mean compromising myself. She frowned, clearly confused. I decided to be even clearer. Let's say I do marry James. No matter how much Lily likes me now, James would constantly have to balance his relationship with me and his daughter. There would always be friction, big or small. I don't think I'd ever be able to win against a child. And honestly, I wouldn't want to. I'm selfish. Auntie, I don't have that kind of self-sacrificing nature. Being a stepmother isn't for me. Raising a child is hard enough. And it's even harder when the child isn't your own. I hesitated for a moment before continuing. And Lily's mother. She didn't abandon her. She's just abroad. What if one day she comes back? How will James and Lily react to her? If they can't let her go, where would that leave me? I've seen enough of men's white moonlight and first loves to last a lifetime, and I want no part of it. I've learned my lesson, and I'll pass on that mess. Thank you very much. My aunt looked like she still wanted to argue, but I propped my chin in my hand and said with a smile, Auntie, remarriage has always been tricky. If you marry someone better off, they dominate you. If you marry someone worse off, people say you're settling. I'm a businesswoman. I calculate costs better than anyone. I've never once thought about getting married again. Marriage isn't the only path for a woman, and I don't need it to prove my worth. I've got money, property, brains, and I'm not lacking for love. Why would I tie myself down? Hearing this, my aunt finally gave up, though she sighed heavily. You're stubborn as a mule. You know that. But there was a hint of relief in her voice, as if she could see how fulfilled I already was. She patted my hand and smiled faintly. After that conversation, I threw myself into expanding my business. I stopped playing small and began growing a legitimate clothing enterprise. As my business flourished, Jack inevitably reappeared, trying to worm his way back into my life. But no matter how persistent he was, I had already moved far beyond his reach. I never gave Jack a kind look. No matter what tricks he pulled, whether he pretended to be drunk and whispered sweet nothings or played the pity card. To me, he was nothing more than a clown, a ridiculous act at best. The wounds he had inflicted on me were real. Even if the scars healed, the marks were still there. I didn't believe in broken mirrors being pieced back together. I believed in karma, in watching the tables turn until the very end. Why should I forgive him just because he shed a few tears and muttered, "I'm sorry"? Why should I pretend nothing ever happened? Seeing the growing coldness in my eyes, Jack finally stopped his relentless pursuit and switched to a softer approach. But by the time I'd earned enough money to live comfortably for the rest of my life, I left for a third-tier city, bought a villa with a sprawling garden, and settled into a quiet, peaceful retirement. I wanted to distance myself completely from Jack. After all, as long as I stayed home, he had no way of pestering me. And so, I ignored him for 20 years. When he turned 45, Jack was diagnosed with late-stage lung cancer. Lying in his hospital bed, frail and weak, his family couldn't help but call me, but I never picked up the phone. Not even when the doctor announced his death. I had said I wouldn't forgive him, and I meant it. I kept that promise for a lifetime. In the alternate past, after the news broke that both my son and I had fallen down the stairs and died, Jack and his daughter, Annie, rushed home. The room was dim when Annie stepped in, and the first thing she saw was Jack cradling my lifeless body, his face a mask of madness. "Lauren, stop pretending. Isn't this what you wanted? I'm home now. How long are you going to keep this up? If you hadn't been so strong-willed, if you hadn't stopped caring about me, if you hadn't acted like you didn't care about anything, I never would have tried to provoke you with Jenna Monroe," Jack shouted. his voice hoarse, as if trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. Unable to bear it any longer, Annie shoved him away and protectively stood over my body. She glared at him with pure disgust. My mom is dead. Who are you putting on this show for? You're disgusting. Just like my mom always said. You're pathetic. Tears welled in Annie's eyes as she choked out her words, her voice trembling with fury. When she was alive, all she wanted was for you to treat her with the respect she deserved as your wife. But what did you do? You spent your days flirting and whispering sweet nothings to your precious soulmate. Don't tell me it wasn't intentional, because it broke her completely. If it weren't for me, if she hadn't been afraid that you and that woman would hurt me, she would have left you long ago and lived a better life without you. Annie's voice cracked with grief. But she wasn't done. She tore the jade bead bracelets from her wrists and thrust them in front of Jack. Do you see these scars? She screamed, pointing at the faint but deep marks that still marred her skin. She did this to herself after I was born. Postpartum depression. Nerve damage. And what were you doing then? You were mocking her for being unreasonable, for being embarrassing, for not knowing her place. She told you she wasn't feeling well, but you never cared. Not once. You and everyone else trampled her into the dirt. Jack opened his mouth as if to say something, but no sound came. He could only stand there, his lips trembling. As Annie broke down, tears streaming down her face. Every time Jack tried to step closer, Annie lashed out, biting, kicking, doing whatever she could to keep him away. It was as if she wanted to tear him apart in her grief. After Lauren's burial, Jack spiraled into alcoholism. 3 years later, unable to keep up, he handed over the company to Annie, his only daughter. No one dared question her authority. She was Jack's sole heir. After all, the board members who didn't approve of her decisions could do nothing but swallow their pride and stay silent. Once Annie took control, she wasted no time. She boldly restructured the company, making sweeping changes. First, she cut ties with Jenna Monroe's company, pulled back all investments, and publicly announced that they would never cooperate again due to severe formaldehyde contamination in building materials. Jenna's fledgling company, barely a year old, couldn't survive such a blow. Without Jack's support, no clients were willing to take the risk of working with her. Salaries stopped being paid, employees revolted, and Jenna found herself scrambling desperately. Out of options, Jenna finally showed up at Jack's door, begging for help. Before she could say much, Annie stormed in, kicked open the door, and slapped Jenna across the face. I'm the head of the Carter family now. Do you understand that? She hissed. You always pride yourself on being an independent, clear-headed woman, don't you? What happened? Miss Strong and Capable? Did you lose your strength the moment you lost a man? Annie's sharp sarcasm hit Jenna Monroe like a whip. Before Jenna could even muster a defense, Annie pointed toward Jack and continued. What a pity, though. He's just an old man with no real power now. If you really want to marry him, go ahead. After all, I've already taken over the company, and thanks to all those nutritional supplements my mother fed him over the years, he lost his ability to have kids a long time ago. You'd be doing me a favor by taking care of him for free. As his daughter, I'd be delighted. Annie's words struck like lightning. Jenna's face turned pale, and Jack could only let out a bitter, humorless laugh. So she never believed me, he thought. His expression twisted as the weight of his years hit him all at once. He muttered to himself, I've become a joke. Trusting you would have been like trusting a pig to climb a tree. Annie smirked coldly and turned her back. Lauren had profoundly influenced Annie's life choices. In the end, Annie chose never to marry. Even when she decided she wanted a child, she went to a sperm bank, selected a donor with exceptional genes, and raised the child on her own. And so, they each lived their own version of happiness. Jack, however, spent his final years in quiet disgrace. Annie had him moved to Lauren's villa, where he was allowed to move freely, everywhere except Lauren's room. You don't deserve it, Annie told him flatly when he asked. Even his request to be buried alongside Lauren when the time came was flatly rejected. You already disgusted my mother for an entire lifetime. There's no way I'd let you defile her path to reincarnation. Jack died with regret in his heart. Yet, for reasons unknown, He opened his eyes one day to find himself back in his youth. The line between dream and reality blurred. But one thing was clear. Lauren was alive. She was so vibrant, so radiant, even more captivating than when he had first met her. But this time, things were different. They were already divorced. Their daughter didn't exist. And their relationship was icy at best. Jack thought that if he treated her with genuine care and sincerity, if he showed her how much he had changed, she would forgive him. Yet even when he fell ill with lung cancer, when chemotherapy reduced him to a hollow shell, Lauren remained indifferent. She never softened, never wavered. It was only then that Jack finally understood. Lauren truly, deeply hated him.